Welcome to Session 6. In this session, David will be discussing two main topics: government detention and dealing with demands for information. This session is important for every team because regardless of where you go, you will have people ask you for information, whether it's a customs agent or someone sitting next to you on the plane. Take notes and follow along as David walks you through these points.
All right. In this session, we're going to deal with something that's probably far more likely to be an issue that comes up on a trip than any of the criminal stuff or the assault things that we've been talking about. Those are tough issues and we need to be ready to deal with them. But this next session, we're going to talk about dealing with unfriendly government, unfriendly customs, folks that maybe don't want you there or are just personally prejudiced against you. We're going to talk about how to deal with that and some of the problems that missions have had, short-term and long-term folks have had, and how to get around those problems. That's what I'd like to spend the next few minutes on anyway. Historically, in my experience, in my other job when I'm not teaching is answering the phone when people get in trouble and trying to be the help. When they give them, sometimes when they capture them, they give them that you can call the lifeline one-time thing, and kind of like the game show. Anyway, I get a lot of calls, and the vast majority of my calls aren't about the hostage taking and the assaults and all the things we've discussed. The majority are about government detentions, and those detentions, although they are far less lethal, can be far more damaging to short-term missions personnel and to long-term missions. Because a mess up with the government means nobody gets to come back. It means the team is done and we're out of the country. It means the long-term folks may have a problem staying in the country because you've said or done things, signed things that you shouldn't. And it could, in a worst case, mean I've got national folks, people who have to live in that country, in trouble. And now they're kind of regretting that I even came because I brought on more trouble than I brought help. We want to prevent that, and so we're going to cover some things. First of all, let's keep it in perspective with the whole terrorist thing. Going to jail for not for something you've done wrong, just because you're an American in the wrong place or because they suspect or because they want to make a point politically. Going to jail is not nearly as lethal an experience. We don't see people perishing in foreign jails. And when I say this, I don't mean nationals, what some of these countries will do to their own people. I'm talking about as an American traveling. If I go into one of these detention situations, I will very likely return home, and probably in a few days. 1 to 2 days to 3 days, and a couple of occasions a week or two, but these are short things. I mean, if I know that ahead of time, when the guy's telling you you're going to be in jail forever here unless you do this, this, and this, I want to keep in the back of my mind that's not true. That's what they say to loosen me up. The truth is, I'm probably going to be out here in a day or 2 or 3, and I'm very likely that I'm going home alive and fine, and that just kind of changes their ability to bully and play with my mind, which is what they're going to do. Historically, the other problem is, even though this is the shortest threat, it is the least dangerous in terms of being lethal or physically harmful. It is the area where most people fall down and say or do things. They come out of their box and they say things they shouldn't. That doesn't make sense. There's less threat, but people cave in quicker. And there's some answers on why that happens. For one, you're dealing with people who are much better trained and prepared to fool you and play with your mind and get things. And so we want to put a stop to that. I think the first tool, though, is to just remember the facts. No matter what the guy says, you would be hard-pressed to put to name 4 or 5 cases in the history in the last 50 years where an American who really didn't do anything wrong got put in jail for a long period of time. Now, you go overseas and you break real laws, the guys who smuggle drugs and stuff, they may get locked up. But being jailed for religious things, being jailed because someone wants to make a political point, that's a short-term thing. I think we need to keep that in our minds. Also, you need to remember at this point what we talked about, asking for your government representative, asking for your ambassador or somebody from your embassy. That is a treaty right, and it's your best asset. On occasion, a short-term team may go to a country where there is no U.S. embassy. There are a few of those. Know that by treaty and by agreement, in any country that we don't have an embassy, we have an allied embassy who has said they will act on behalf of our people. I know some missions folks who are in a country where they had to go to the Polish embassy because that was the embassy who had agreed to act for us. And so they did, and the Polish embassy personnel took just as good a care of them as ours would have, passed all the information off to our guys, and it worked fine. And if the guy says, I'm sorry you can't talk to your ambassador, you don't have one here, I am not going to pause with, well, okay, I guess lock me up. My next one is going to be, well, we often teach ABCs, Australians, British, Canadians, because they speak English, Swiss, Germans. Anybody who's got a friendly relationship with our country is going to take care of that issue for us. So don't hesitate on that, and don't forget to use that situation. Okay? What do you get out of a jailer that's different than a terrorist interrogator? Well, you're likely to get somebody who's older, because it's a career job, unlike, I mean, the suicide bombing thing is not a long-term career, and the terrorist thing, I used to say there's no training program. There is, but it's not as much of a career. Now you're getting a guy who, like an American cop or something, he's been at it for 20 years, he's going to get a pension, so he's had years of training. So he's a little bit better, older, a little bit better trained. Initially, when Americans are arrested, sometimes I'm running into the foot cop or the guard who's the new guy with no training. But over time, most Americans who are held for more than a few hours end up meeting pretty well-trained people. Okay? For Westerners, it's very common that if this goes beyond a few hours, I will probably be dealing with a trained interrogator and not just a policeman. Somebody whose profession is to get folks to give them information. Guys like us who are taught to try to do that to folks. And that may be one reason we see missions struggle and short-term and long-term people struggle. Even though there's less threat, there's more bluff because you're dealing with a guy who's trained to play with your mind a little bit.
This is Kevin Moran. Kevin and his wife were detained in the Pacific Rim for several days. He talks about their first day of interrogations.
But we got to the police station, and there was just everybody was busy, setting up the first team to interrogate us. We had people coming all day that first day, just trying to find out what we had been doing and asking us about the resources, and then what to do with us. So we had times we were interrogated, together, and then we were split up.
All right. This guy may or may not be all that friendly. He may be a bit prejudiced. He may have anti-American feelings. He's certainly got political agenda. For the most part, they really are arresting you for not doing things that anyone in the world would consider criminal. He's arresting you for things his government has decided are. And so even though you haven't been arrested as a drug dealer, I think it's important to remember that most of the time when he arrests a foreign citizen, it is probably dealing with a real criminal, a drug dealer, somebody who was caught up in prostitution or smuggling, and so initially his treatment of you may be a little harsh just because the last 10 Americans he dealt with really were doing stuff wrong. And I think if I at least understand that, it's a little easier to continue to be polite and deal with him while he adjusts. Initially, this guy's probably arrested you because he's anti-Christian or anti-American or anti-Western, or to prove that they have authority over you and that they can do so, and we've seen that. He may be arresting you because he's mistaken you for somebody else. That does happen more and more, especially with everybody trying to track terrorism, and you're being held for a few hours while they decide if you're this person that someone else is looking for. If it goes past a couple of hours, that being pulled into the back room of customs or something, and it goes past an hour or two, then usually, in a lot of these types of situations, their motivation changed. It went from I'm just picking on you, or I want to harass you, or I'm looking for a bribe, and now it usually moves into, ooh, we've arrested the citizen of a major nation, and our government's going to have egg on our face if we don't make it look like you really had it coming. So how do I do that? It shifts to propaganda, and you need to realize that. Now I'm not, or initially I really wanted to know what you were doing because I need to know if you're a crook. Now I realize I've made a mistake and I've arrested somebody who's going to make a stink. I may need to make you look like a crook so that I can save face for my government. Well, of course we arrested him. We found 4 or 5 things he was doing. And so it really turns into a bit more of a propaganda or a media thing. Occasionally Americans are held for a longer period of time who did nothing wrong, but there's a political thing going on. We're holding one of theirs. It's happened in the Cold War with the Russians. We'd see an American picked up off the streets in Russia we had a newspaper man picked up. He wasn't doing anything. He couldn't figure out why we were holding him. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with that we'd arrested a Russian spy, so they needed to pick somebody up and accuse him of spying so we could trade spies. Okay? So sometimes that kind of stuff happens. If you're held beyond a few hours, though, remember their motivation now is not facts and information. They're trying to justify what they've done. So what happens to most of us when we're held beyond a few hours? He's not believing what I'm saying. Maybe I need to give him more facts, more information, so I'm feeding him the wrong thing. In fact, I may be feeding him something he can eventually go, aha, well, that one was wrong. You shouldn't have done that. I mean, the more I talk, the more I can eventually find something that you did wrong. You know, you tore the tags off your pillows that say do not remove or tear. You know. And so there's this problem for us that we feel the longer we're held, the more we need to justify and talk. And he, in fact, is looking for details for a different reason.
The testimony you're about to hear is from Mel Skinner. He was connected with a short-term mission team in Russia that was illegally detained by the government. He shares how he feels they could have avoided their problems had they been more prepared.
Bottom line was they did everything they could do to isolate the team away from some kind of legal advice. Make sure you have that STS correct and down pat. I just believe that if we'd have had our ducks in a row with this last team, some of our misery would have been avoided.
You're about to hear from Carol and Bill Gutschall, members of the short-term mission team that were detained in Russia. Listen to them as they tell you some of the things that happened during their government detention.
Actually, nobody was ever questioned but Bill. We got word from someone on the outside, a missionary, that we were not to be separated and not to sign everything. So when they came and called my name, I just said, I can't go with you. But we had no idea what was happening to him. That was our biggest fear. That the other 9 of us were put in a room on the 3rd floor where it was very cold. It was 30 degrees below zero there.
They kept asking me the same questions over and over. And, you know, I felt like they was trying to get me to say something else that they could intimidate me, but I didn't. I just told the same story over and over and over again. Again, they videotaped this all the time. They took a lot of shots with cameras. People would come in and take shots with their cameras, and yes, I felt like that I was really being intimidated.
These guys are probably going to be a little bit more sophisticated than the terrorist interrogator. They're likely to speak English, particularly after a few hours, because they're bringing somebody in who can deal with you in that language. And they're quite honestly more able and willing to exploit you. This guy gets a promotion if he gets the American to sign this thing, if he gets a way to save face for his government. He gets a bonus out of that deal. And so he's got some real, you know, the fact that you went home in disgrace knowing that you signed a confession for something you didn't do is not as important to him. This isn't a justice system now. This is a propaganda issue. That's different. That's hugely difficult for us growing up in a democracy where for the most part things work where, you know, if I'm arrested by an American police officer who thinks I really did something wrong, what is the best way out? Tell him the whole truth, explain the thing, and I'll be moving along if I wasn't doing anything. This guy's not after the whole truth. He's after something he can use to justify what he wants to do. That's a completely different situation. He's willing to exploit you. I'm going to have a chart up here on your screen that I want you to look at. It's just a quick comparison between the hostage taker over here on the left versus the government detainer on the right. And compare the two side by side when you're being held by one. Length of detainment. For an American, worldwide right now, the average hostage, American taken prisoner in a hostage thing will last a year, 12 months. That's a lot of time out of a life. In a jail situation, in a government one, just again to make my point, the average, I've never seen a hard statistic. There is a State Department statistic on the other one. In my experience, it's 1 to 3 days. There have been a few longers, and there were things they did that made them longer, but 1 to 3 days, okay? Likelihood of really being treated harshly or hurt. Far more likely by a terrorist. He's already a criminal. He's not exactly accountable. Far less likely by a policeman, because we know that you're going to probably survive and go home. That's 99.9%. He knows you're going to go home and tell that his government broke rules and did things. So there's a lot more accountability. You're far more likely not to be hurt. Likelihood of survival. We know that 20% of American hostages right now overseas who have no training and preparation do perish in terrorist or criminal hostage takings. It's somewhere in the 99-somethings that survive in government detention. That's important to keep the facts in my mind if I'm being lied to by somebody. I have a very high chance of surviving. Now, I'm not saying you should flaunt that and say, dude, I had a class, I know, you can't kill me. Because he may make you wish that you were, dead, but I wouldn't become arrogant about it. But in my mind, I wouldn't buy into the lies. The need to build a relationship. With a hostage taker who could murder me, I really quickly need him to see that I'm a dad and I have children and I have a mom and anything that makes him see a human, because it's harder for him to commit crime and murder. With a policeman, quite often, who's not holding me out of justice but out of propaganda, giving him a lot of information can often just lead to more Google searches and more trouble. So I would humanize and I would be polite and I'd tell him a few things, but I'd probably say less to that government official who's exploiting me. Okay? With a terrorist, I'll probably end up telling him more. I may have to even compromise more because he's threatening death and he could carry it out. With a policeman, when he's saying, tell me this, tell me the names of the nationals you've been talking to, or else you're going to rot in jail here, I could smile and nod and say, yes, sir, I'm trying to help you out. But I would know in my head that's not true, and that no matter what I do, I'm probably going to get kicked out of the country in the next couple of days. Am I going to leave knowing I got somebody hurt, or am I going to leave knowing I did the right thing really becomes my choice. Likelihood of torture. In the movies, 100%. In real life, very few terrorists, police, they don't do that, particularly to Western citizens. For one, you can't get good information from anybody under torture. People will say anything to make you stop, so it's not a reliable info source. And particularly in a government situation, what happens when I release you, because you have a 99.9% chance of going home, and you tell the world that we hooked you up to the electrodes and pulled out your fingernails? I mean, there's going to be some issues come up worldwide. Okay? So that's, in the end, I think it's important to remember, criminals are usually after concessions and cash. Terrorists, same thing. In a government situation that goes beyond a few hours, they're really looking for some kind of political gain. They need you to say things and do things for them. Know that these policemen may be a little bit high-strung. They initially, like I said, in capture with the criminals, there's a little more danger of being roughed up initially because they don't know if you're a threat. Maybe they don't know that you're not a real criminal or a smuggler or something dangerous yet. Expect that. Expect the guy's serving a search warrant. I've done that. His nerves are up. If he makes a mistake, it's going to be in the international news because he's arresting a foreigner. So know that they're going to be a little high-strung in the beginning, and that will affect how you behave. We talked about maybe taking a run for it or escaping in the criminal situation. What do we call that when you make a run for it in a government situation? We call it resisting arrest or jailbreak, and in any country I know in the world, that's against the law. So they arrested me on mock charges and I made a run for it. Now they got me on real charges. So we wouldn't recommend that you break laws and take off. I'd stay and I'd do what I got to do, and I'd know that I'm probably going to go home pretty quickly. Okay? If I ever got into a situation where they're breaking the rules, people are cheating, it's happened a couple times in countries that were falling apart. I'm arrested and the jailers are, other prisoners are starting to disappear. At the point where I decide it's more dangerous to stay than to go, I'd go. But up until then, I'd think that through. My approach towards a policeman or a soldier who's holding me, absolutely go for polite and courteous. As a policeman, I can tell you, you can be the worst crook in the world, but if you're polite and courteous, this is going to go better for everybody. So I may want to say, I'm an American, I'm not doing anything wrong, I've got religious freedom here, I'm only helping your people, come on, lay off. And what I ought to be saying is, sir, I'm sorry, there's a misunderstanding, I didn't do anything, I certainly didn't mean to do anything. And that polite and that courteous thing, it's just, the Bible says a soft answer turneth away wrath. It is hard to keep roughing up a prisoner who is just talking nicely and calmly to you. So polite and courteous. And then I'd start asking for the embassy. Somebody from my government. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. Please, I need to talk to somebody from my government. We might want to start to ask for Bob. Now, in the terrorist situation, Bob is my answer to a lot of things. But even in a government situation, when they ask me questions, we can't release you, sir, because we're not sure that you weren't doing something wrong. I already told you I'm here. I like your, I'm laying bricks, I'm helping your people, I'm building some houses for your folks, I'm not doing anything wrong. And I can give you the name of a guy, Bob, here. He could vouch for me. So sometimes the Bob is another good source. And I want to make sure it's a Bob that won't add more to the story. Oh yeah, they're building a house while they're doing some evangelical work. I don't want anybody who's going to, add to my story. But giving them Bob might be a useful strategy to help get this thing cleared up. Because a real criminal won't usually give you references, okay? And an innocent person will. Also, when I'm in jail and they're telling me I'm going to be there for weeks, it might be nice to know that Bob knows I'm in jail so that my family knows I'm okay. And there's this accountability. Somebody's going to come and get me, Depending on the situation, many of us are going to feel better knowing that somebody else knows. Again, I would not ask for my U.S. rep in the first few minutes of being detained. A policeman pulls me aside on the sidewalk and wants to talk. That's not the time to say, stop, I don't have to talk to you, I want to see a rep for my government. Because I may have gone what would have been a 5-minute questioning into a, okay, well, the law says 4 days, so you're going to wait for 4 days now in a jail cell. I would wait until I can see that they're not letting me go and it's definitely not, something's not right, and they're not listening, so that's when I would invoke my privilege there. And I would do it again in a polite and a courteous way. Now, I want to talk specifically about going through customs. Some of us may face some minor crime out there. Some of us may face a